Just drive and keep quiet, she snapped at her driver before the biggest meeting of her life. But when billion-dollar investors started walking away, the man she'd mocked for months opened his mouth, and what came out froze everyone in the room. The titanium elevator doors of Sterling Global Enterprises slid open with a whisper that cost more than most people's yearly salary. Victoria Sterling stepped into the marble lobby of her corporate empire, her heels clicking with the precision of a metronome counting down to someone else's destruction. At 42, she had built a technology conglomerate worth $3 billion, and she wore her success like armor, expensive, impenetrable, and designed to keep everyone at a distance. "Morning, Ms. Sterling," the receptionist chirped, with the enthusiasm of someone who desperately needed their job. Victoria didn't respond. She never did. Acknowledging subordinates was a waste of the time she billed at $5,000 per hour. Her eyes scanned the lobby with the practiced disinterest of someone who owned everything she saw and found none of it impressive anymore. The building itself was a monument to her ego. 73 floors of glass and steel piercing the city skyline like a sword declaring victory over those foolish enough to compete with her. Every surface gleamed with the kind of cleanliness that required an army of invisible workers to maintain, people Victoria had never met and never intended to meet. "Ms. Sterling, your driver is waiting," her executive assistant Rachel Mitchell announced, appearing at her elbow with a tablet and the harried expression of someone perpetually 3 steps behind an impossible schedule. "Which one?" Victoria asked, not because she cared, but because keeping people off balance was her favorite sport. "Marcus, ma'am, your regular driver." Victoria's lip curled slightly. Marcus Johnson. The man had been driving her for the past 6 months, and in all that time she'd learned exactly 2 things about him. He showed up on time, and he knew when to keep his mouth shut. Everything else about him was irrelevant. He was a driver, a function, as interchangeable as the coffee she drank and barely tasted. The parking garage smelled of concrete and expensive cars. Victoria's vehicle, a luxury sedan that cost more than most houses, waited with its engine purring. Marcus stood beside the rear door, his posture professional, his expression neutral. He wore the standard uniform of a private driver, nothing remarkable, nothing memorable, exactly as it should be. "Miss Sterling," he greeted, opening the door. She slid into the back seat without acknowledgement, already pulling out her phone to review the presentation that would define the next decade of her company. Today was the day. The summit meeting with international investors who controlled a $1 billion venture capital fund that could transform Sterling Global from a national powerhouse into a global domination. Marcus closed the door gently and moved to the driver's seat. The privacy partition was down. Victoria liked it that way, not because she wanted conversation, but because she enjoyed the reminder that another human being was literally at her service, existing only to transport her from one victory to another. "The International Commerce Center," she instructed, not looking up from her phone. "We leave in 2 minutes. Not 1 minute and 59 seconds. Not 2 minutes and 1 second. 2 minutes." "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied quietly. Victoria's fingers flew across her screen, making final adjustments to projections that would make grown investors weep with joy. This deal was her masterpiece. 18 months of negotiations, strategy sessions, and calculated manipulations had led to this moment. By the end of today, she would be signing contracts that would make her one of the wealthiest self-made women in the country. "Marcus," she said suddenly, still not looking up. "How long have you been driving?" It was a test. She sometimes asked her drivers personal questions, not because she cared about the answers, but because she enjoyed watching them squirm, uncertain whether honesty or flattery was the safer path. "Several years, ma'am," Marcus answered evenly. "Several years," Victoria repeated with thinly veiled mockery. "And in those several years, have you ever aspired to be anything more than someone who drives other people to their success?" The question hung in the air like poison. Rachel, sitting in the front passenger seat reviewing notes, shifted uncomfortably. This was classic Victoria, finding small ways to remind everyone around her of their place in her universe. "I'm content with my work, ma'am," Marcus replied, his voice revealing nothing. "Content," Victoria laughed, a sound like ice cracking. How wonderfully modest, content to open doors, content to wait in parking garages, content to live a life so small it could fit in the trunk of this car. Rachel's fingers tightened on her tablet. She'd witnessed Victoria's casual cruelty countless times, but it never got easier to watch. Yet speaking up would mean joining Marcus on the receiving end, and Rachel had bills to pay, ambitions to fulfill. "Marcus, let me share something with you," Victoria continued, her tone shifting to the mock educational voice she used when she wanted to humiliate someone while pretending to help them. "Do you know why you'll never be anything more than a driver? It's not about opportunity. It's not about circumstances. It's about vision. Some people are born to lead, to build empires, to shape the world. Others are born to drive those people around." Marcus's hands remained steady on the steering wheel. "Perhaps you're right, ma'am." "Perhaps?" Victoria's voice sharpened. "There's no perhaps about it. Look at us. You and me in the same vehicle, breathing the same air. But we might as well be living on different planets. I'm about to close $1 billion deal that will change thousands of lives, reshape entire markets. And you'll drive me there, wait in the parking garage and drive me back. That's the totality of your contribution to the world." The car glided through morning traffic, with Marcus navigating smoothly despite the barrage of insults. They passed coffee shops where people rushed to work, parks where early joggers chased health and peace, neighborhoods that represented every economic tier of society. From inside the climate-controlled luxury of the sedan, it all looked equally distant and irrelevant. "I've met hundreds of drivers," Victoria continued, scrolling through her presentation slides without really seeing them anymore. She was on a roll now, and stopping would feel like defeat. "They all have the same look, the same resignation, as if somewhere deep down, they know they're fundamentally limited, as if they've accepted that mediocrity is their destiny." "Some people find meaning in service, ma'am," Marcus said quietly. Victoria's head snapped up. "Did I ask for your philosophy? Did I request your thoughts on meaning and purpose? Your job is to drive. Your job is to be quiet unless spoken to. Your job is to remember that every single thing you have, this job, your paycheck, your ability to feed whatever family you might have, exists because I allow it to exist." The silence that followed was thick and ugly. Rachel stared out the window, pretending to be absorbed in street signs. Marcus drove with the same steady competence he'd shown every day for 6 months, and Victoria returned to her phone, satisfied that she'd re-established the proper order of their relationship. They were approaching the International Commerce Center now, a gleaming tower in the financial district, where the world's most powerful investors made decisions that rippled through global markets. Victoria felt the familiar thrill of anticipation. This was her arena. This was where she proved again and again that she was the apex predator in a world full of prey. "The presentation is flawless," Rachel said, trying to shift the atmosphere. "The investors are going to be blown away." "Of course they are," Victoria replied. "I don't create anything less than perfect." Marcus pulled up to the VIP entrance, where suited executives and their assistants bustled with purpose. Doormen in formal attire stood ready to serve, their faces arranged in professional neutrality that masked whatever they really thought about the parade of wealth and power they witnessed daily. "Wait here," Victoria instructed Marcus as she prepared to exit. "This will take approximately 4 hours, maybe 5 if they want to negotiate terms, which they won't because my terms are non-negotiable. Be ready to leave the moment I return." "Yes, ma'am," Marcus responded, coming around to open her door. Victoria stepped out, straightening her attire with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her right to be anywhere. Rachel scrambled to follow, juggling the tablet, presentation materials, and her own insecurities about being adequate support for a woman who accepted nothing less than perfection. "And Marcus," Victoria turned back, unable to resist one final jab. "Try to do something productive while you wait, though I suppose for someone at your level, productive might just mean staying awake." She didn't wait for a response. She never did. Victoria Sterling walked into the International Commerce Center like a queen entering conquered territory, leaving behind a driver who'd just endured another morning of calculated humiliation. What Victoria didn't know, what she couldn't have known, because she'd never bothered to see Marcus as anything more than a function, was that the man standing beside her luxury sedan spoke 9 languages fluently, that he held advanced degrees from institutions she'd name-drop to impress people, that his quiet acceptance of her insults wasn't resignation, but strategy, and that in approximately 4 hours, when her perfect presentation fell apart in ways she couldn't have anticipated, Marcus Johnson was going to become the most important person in her world. But for now, she walked through those gleaming doors, absolutely certain of her superiority, completely convinced of her control, and totally unprepared for the moment when everything she thought she knew about power, value, and human worth was about to be shattered. The elevator carried her upward, and with each floor she climbed, Victoria felt more certain that today would be another triumph in her unbroken string of victories. She had no idea she was ascending toward the most humbling experience of her life. Behind her, in the parking garage, Marcus Johnson returned to the driver's seat, pulled out a worn book in Mandarin, and began to read. He had 4 hours to wait. He'd waited longer for more important things, and when the time came, he would be ready. The conference room on the 47th floor of the International Commerce Center was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the city spread below like a conquered kingdom. The oval table was crafted from a single piece of rare wood that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Every chair was positioned with geometric precision, every detail calculated to communicate power, permanence, and the kind of wealth that could reshape nations. Victoria Sterling entered the room with the confidence of a general who'd never lost a battle. She carried herself like someone who believed the universe rearranged itself to accommodate her preferences. Behind her, Rachel Mitchell juggled presentation materials, her anxiety carefully hidden behind professional efficiency. "Gentlemen," Victoria greeted the assembled investors with a smile that was all calculation and no warmth. The room held 8 men and 2 women, representing investment firms from 6 different countries. These weren't ordinary investors. They were the kind of financial titans who could make or break entire industries with a single decision, the kind who spoke in billions the way normal people spoke in hundreds. "Ms. Sterling," acknowledged James Bradford, the lead American investor and nominal head of the consortium. "Thank you for joining us. We've been looking forward to this presentation." "The pleasure is mine," Victoria replied, though her tone suggested the pleasure was actually theirs. She moved to the head of the table with the proprietary air of someone who considered every room her room, every conversation her stage. Rachel began setting up the presentation while Victoria engaged in the ritualistic small talk that preceded serious business. She was masterful at this dance, knowing exactly how much courtesy to offer without appearing weak, how much confidence to project without triggering defensive resistance. "Before we begin," Bradford said, "I should mention we have some additional participants joining by video conference. Our partners from Shanghai, Tokyo, and Sao Paulo wanted to be part of this discussion." Victoria's smile didn't falter, but something cold flickered in her eyes. She preferred face-to-face negotiations where she could read body language, exploit weaknesses, dominate the physical space. Video conferences were harder to control, but not impossible. "Of course," she said smoothly. "The more perspectives, the better." The large screens on the wall flickered to life, revealing 3 separate video feeds. In one, a group of Chinese investors sat around a table in what was clearly a Shanghai office. In another, Japanese executives arranged themselves with formal precision. The third showed Brazilian financiers in what appeared to be an early morning meeting, given the light streaming through their windows. Victoria assessed each face quickly, cataloging what she could read in their expressions, their postures, their reactions to seeing her. This was her gift, the ability to scan a room and identify exactly who needed to be impressed, who needed to be intimidated, who needed to be charmed. "Shall we begin?" she asked, not waiting for an answer. Rachel dimmed the lights, and the first slide appeared, a stunning visual representation of Sterling Global's proposed expansion into artificial intelligence infrastructure. For the next 40 minutes, Victoria delivered what she knew was a flawless presentation. Her numbers were impeccable. Her projections were aggressive but defendable. Her vision for transforming Sterling Global into a multinational AI powerhouse was compelling, sophisticated, and precisely calculated to appeal to the kind of investors who thought in decades rather than quarters. She spoke of market disruptions, technological advantages, strategic partnerships, and returns on investment that would make them all significantly wealthier. Every slide was a work of art. Every statistic was chosen for maximum impact. Every word was designed to create an inevitable conclusion. Investing in Sterling Global wasn't just smart business. It was the only logical decision. When she finished, the room sat in silence for a moment. The kind of silence that precedes either triumph or disaster. Impressive, Bradford said finally. The technical specifications alone are remarkable. Your AI architecture is genuinely innovative. Victoria allowed herself an internal moment of satisfaction. This was the response she'd anticipated. This was the beginning of their capitulation to her vision. However, Bradford continued, and that single word dropped into the room like a stone into still water. We have some concerns we'd like to address. Victoria's smile remained fixed, but her eyes sharpened. Of course, I'm happy to address any questions. The concerns aren't from us. Bradford gestured to the American investors around the table. We're quite impressed. But our partners, he glanced at the video screens, have expressed some reservations. On the screen showing the Shanghai office, one of the investors leaned forward and began speaking in rapid Mandarin. His tone was measured but firm, his gestures suggesting someone laying out a careful argument. Victoria waited for the translation that didn't come. The man continued speaking, and several of his colleagues nodded in agreement. The monologue lasted nearly 2 minutes, covering what was clearly multiple points of concern. When he finished, silence filled the conference room again. I apologize, Victoria said, her voice controlled but with an edge of irritation. I didn't catch the translation. Bradford shifted uncomfortably. Yes. Our translator was supposed to be here. There seems to have been a miscommunication with the service we contracted. A miscommunication, Victoria repeated, her tone suggesting that miscommunications were things that happened to incompetent people, not to her. Mr. Chen was expressing concerns about the cultural adaptation of your AI systems for the Chinese market, Bradford explained. He's questioning whether your algorithms account for linguistic nuances specific to Mandarin and Cantonese. He's also concerned about data sovereignty issues and regulatory compliance in ways that the translated briefing materials apparently didn't fully address. Victoria's mind raced. The translated briefing materials had been prepared by a professional service she'd paid a fortune. They were supposed to be comprehensive. They were supposed to be perfect. I can address those concerns, Victoria said firmly. Our AI architecture is culturally agnostic, meaning it adapts to any linguistic framework. As for regulatory compliance, we have consultants in every market we enter. Bradford translated her response into what Victoria had to assume was Mandarin. His pronunciation was hesitant, his phrasing clearly that of someone who'd learned the language formally but never really mastered it. Mr. Chen responded immediately, his tone more insistent now. He spoke for another minute, occasionally gesturing at documents in front of him. He says, Bradford translated slowly, clearly struggling, that culturally agnostic systems are precisely the problem. That language isn't just vocabulary, but carries cultural context that artificial intelligence often misinterprets. He's citing specific examples of Western AI companies that failed in China because they didn't understand. Bradford trailed off, looking frustrated. I'm sorry, I'm not getting all of his technical terminology. My Mandarin is functional but not sophisticated enough for this level of detail. Victoria felt something unfamiliar crawling up her spine. Uncertainty. This wasn't how the meeting was supposed to go. This wasn't the script she'd written. On another screen, one of the Japanese investors spoke up, also in his native language. His tone was polite but carried unmistakable skepticism. Mr. Tanaka is expressing similar concerns about the Japanese market, explained Margaret Chen, one of the American investors who apparently spoke some Japanese. He's saying that your presentation doesn't adequately address the unique challenges of Japan's regulatory environment or the specific business culture there. I have detailed appendices that address every market, Victoria interjected, her voice harder now. Rachel, pull up the Japan-specific materials. Rachel fumbled with the laptop, pulling up slides that had been meticulously prepared by consultants who'd charged obscene fees for their expertise. The slides appeared on screen, dense with information, charts, and projections. Mr. Tanaka studied them for a moment, then spoke again. His words were measured, but his expression had shifted to something that looked like disappointment. Margaret Chen translated. He says these materials appear to be based on generic market research rather than deep cultural understanding. He's particularly concerned about your approach to data privacy, which he feels misunderstands Japanese consumer psychology. Victoria's jaw tightened. Then perhaps Mr. Tanaka would like to educate us on what we've supposedly misunderstood. The slight sharpness in her tone didn't require translation. Mr. Tanaka's expression became more formal, more closed. In the delicate dance of international business negotiations, Victoria had just made a misstep. The Brazilian investors joined the conversation now, one of them speaking in Portuguese. His gestures were animated, his tone carrying frustration. Mr. Silva is saying, Bradford attempted to translate from Spanish, which was apparently close enough to Portuguese for him to guess at meaning, that the Latin American market projections seem to be based on assumptions that don't reflect regional realities. He's specifically concerned about... Bradford paused, clearly lost. I'm sorry. I'm not following his specifics. Is anyone here fluent in Portuguese? The question was met with shaking heads and uncomfortable glances. The confident momentum of Victoria's presentation had evaporated, replaced by a linguistic barrier she hadn't anticipated and couldn't overcome. Perhaps we should reschedule, suggested one of the American investors, a woman named Patricia Holmes, who clearly saw the meeting derailing. Give everyone time to review materials in their native languages. Arrange for proper translation services. No, Victoria said sharply. Too sharply. She caught herself, modulated her tone. What I mean is, we've all cleared our schedules for this. The investment window is time-sensitive. Market conditions won't wait for translation conveniences. Mr. Chen spoke again from the Shanghai screen, his tone now carrying what even Victoria could recognize as diplomatic withdrawal. He was polite, formal, and clearly preparing to end the meeting. He's saying, Bradford translated reluctantly, that perhaps this deal is premature, that more groundwork needs to be laid before they can commit this level of capital to a company that doesn't seem to fully understand the markets it's trying to enter. Victoria felt panic rising, a sensation she hadn't experienced in professional settings for over a decade. This deal represented 18 months of work. This deal was supposed to be her crowning achievement. This deal was supposed to transform her company from successful to legendary. Gentlemen, ladies, Victoria said, forcing her voice to remain steady. I assure you, we have the expertise necessary to succeed in every market we've outlined. If there's been a failure in translation, that's a technical issue, not a reflection of our strategic capability. But the damage was done. She could see it in the way the American investors exchanged glances. She could hear it in the tone of the international participants. The meeting that was supposed to end with signed contracts was instead ending with polite expressions of needing more time, more information, more assurance. More proof that Victoria Sterling actually understood the world she was trying to conquer. Ms. Sterling, Bradford said, with the careful diplomacy of someone delivering bad news to a volatile recipient. I think we need to take a step back. Your technology is impressive. Your vision is compelling. But my partners are raising legitimate concerns about cultural competency and market understanding. Concerns that aren't addressed by generic consultant reports or translated briefing materials. What exactly are you suggesting? Victoria asked, her voice dangerously quiet. I'm suggesting that we adjourn for today, that you take time to address these cultural and linguistic concerns with more depth and authenticity, that you perhaps bring in advisors who can speak to these markets with genuine expertise. It was a diplomatic rejection, not final but devastating nonetheless. Victoria looked at the screens, at the investors who held her billion-dollar dreams in their hands. Investors who were now politely but firmly withdrawing, not because her technology wasn't good enough, not because her business model wasn't sound, but because she couldn't communicate across the cultural and linguistic barriers she'd never bothered to recognize as barriers. How much time? She asked, hating the hint of desperation in her voice. That depends on how quickly you can address our concerns, Bradford replied. Mr. Chen, Mr. Tanaka, and Mr. Silva are all in town for the next few days for the International Finance Summit. If you could arrange a follow-up meeting with proper translation and cultural consultation, we might be able to salvage this. Tomorrow, Victoria said immediately. I'll arrange everything by tomorrow. Bradford looked skeptical. Miss Sterling, finding qualified interpreters who understand both the technical aspects of your business and the cultural nuances of multiple markets on such short notice. I said tomorrow, Victoria repeated, her tone brooking no argument. I will address every concern raised today. I will demonstrate the cultural competency you're questioning. I will prove that Sterling Global understands these markets better than you currently believe." The investors exchanged glances. Finally, Bradford nodded slowly. "Tomorrow afternoon, then. Same time. But Ms. Sterling, I need to be clear. If these concerns aren't adequately addressed, the consortium will withdraw from negotiations entirely." "Understood," Victoria said through gritted teeth. The meeting dissolved with polite farewells that felt like funeral proceedings. The video screens went dark. The investors filed out with sympathetic expressions that Victoria found more insulting than honest criticism. Rachel gathered materials with hands that trembled slightly, knowing that the blame for this disaster would eventually roll downhill. When the conference room finally emptied, Victoria stood alone at the head of the table, staring out at the city below. From this height, everything looked small, manageable, under control. It was an illusion. She pulled out her phone and began making calls. Translation services, cultural consultants, anyone who could possibly address the concerns that had just destroyed her perfect presentation. But it was already afternoon, and finding the level of expertise she needed on less than 24 hours' notice was proving impossible. "Ms. Sterling," Rachel said quietly, "the car is waiting." Victoria turned, her expression carefully blank. "Tell Marcus to drive to the office. I need to work on this immediately." As they descended in the elevator, Victoria replayed the meeting in her mind, searching for the moment it had all gone wrong, the tactical error that had cost her everything. She didn't realize that the answer to her crisis was waiting in the parking garage. She didn't know that the man she'd humiliated that morning held exactly the skills she desperately needed. She didn't understand that salvation sometimes comes from the places we're too arrogant to look. Marcus Johnson sat in the driver's seat, his book in Mandarin closed now, waiting patiently for a woman who'd never once asked him a question she actually wanted answered. He saw her expression as she approached the car, saw the carefully controlled fury, the desperate calculation, the first cracks in armor that had seemed impenetrable. He opened the door, his face professionally neutral. "The office," Victoria snapped, sliding into the back seat without looking at him. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied quietly. And as he pulled out of the parking garage, Marcus Johnson, who spoke 9 languages fluently, who held advanced degrees in linguistics and international business, who had worked in diplomatic services before personal tragedy had led him to quieter work, said nothing. Sometimes, he'd learned, the most powerful thing you can do is wait for the moment when you'll finally be seen. That moment was coming, sooner than Victoria Sterling could possibly imagine. Victoria Sterling's executive office occupied the entire 73rd floor of her building, a space designed to make visiting competitors feel small and inadequate. Tonight, it felt like a prison. The city lights stretched below like a glittering reminder of everything she was about to lose, while her phone screen glowed with a list of contacts who couldn't help her. "Nothing?" Rachel asked quietly, though she already knew the answer from Victoria's expression. "Nothing," Victoria confirmed, her voice tight with barely controlled fury. "Transglobal Translation Services can't provide interpreters with technical AI expertise on this timeline. Elite Language Solutions is already booked for the Finance Summit. Academic Liaison Services won't work with corporate clients without weeks of advance notice." She threw her phone onto the leather sofa with uncharacteristic violence. Victoria Sterling didn't throw things. Victoria Sterling maintained perfect control at all times. But tonight, control was slipping through her fingers like water. "What about the university?" Rachel suggested hesitantly. "The International Business Department must have graduate students who speak multiple languages." "Graduate students," Victoria repeated with bitter mockery. "I'm trying to close a billion-dollar deal with the world's most sophisticated investors, and you're suggesting I bring graduate students?" Rachel flinched, but pressed on. "Some of them might have real-world experience. International students who came here specifically to study cross-cultural business communication." It was a desperate idea, but Victoria had run out of alternatives. "Fine. Contact the department head. Offer whatever it takes to get someone here by morning. Someone who speaks Mandarin, Japanese, and Portuguese, fluently enough to handle technical business negotiations. That's 3 different language families," Rachel pointed out carefully. "Finding one person who speaks all 3 at that level might be—" "I don't care if it's impossible," Victoria snapped. "Make it possible." "That's what I pay you for." Rachel nodded and retreated to her own office to make calls that would likely yield nothing. Victoria remained alone with the view that now felt like mockery, each light below representing someone who probably had their life more under control than she did in this moment. Her phone buzzed. Victoria grabbed it with desperate hope that evaporated when she saw the name, James Bradford. "Mr. Bradford," she answered, forcing her voice to sound confident rather than desperate. "Ms. Sterling, I wanted to follow up on tomorrow's meeting." His tone was professionally courteous, which somehow made it worse. Pity would have been more honest. "My partners asked me to confirm that you'll have proper translation and cultural consultation in place." "Absolutely," Victoria lied smoothly. "I'm finalizing arrangements now." "Because I need to be clear," Bradford continued. "Mr. Chen specifically said that if tomorrow's meeting doesn't address his concerns about cultural competency, the entire consortium is prepared to walk away permanently. They've already begun preliminary discussions with your competitors." Victoria's hand tightened on the phone. "My competitors don't have the technology we have. They don't have our market positioning or our innovation pipeline." "Perhaps not," Bradford agreed. "But they have something you apparently lack, genuine understanding of international markets. Mr. Chen was quite blunt after you left. He said that American executives often confuse having money with having wisdom, and that Sterling Global seems to exemplify that confusion." Each word landed like a physical blow. Victoria had built her entire identity on being wiser, smarter, more strategic than everyone around her. To have foreign investors question her competency was intolerable. "Tell Mr. Chen," Victoria said, her voice dangerously quiet, "that tomorrow's meeting will demonstrate exactly how wise Sterling Global can be." After Bradford hung up, Victoria stood at the window, her reflection superimposed over the city below. Behind that reflection, she could see Rachel's office, where her assistant was making increasingly desperate phone calls. Beyond that, the elevator bank where Marcus had brought her up hours ago. Marcus, the driver she'd humiliated that morning, the man who'd absorbed her insults with quiet dignity, the functionary she'd dismissed as irrelevant. A strange thought occurred to her, so strange she almost dismissed it immediately. But desperation makes people consider options they'd normally reject. "Rachel," Victoria called out. Her assistant appeared in the doorway, phone pressed to her shoulder. "I'm on hold with the language department coordinator." "Hang up." "But, hang up," Victoria repeated. "I need you to pull the employment file for Marcus Johnson." Rachel's expression shifted to confusion. "Your driver? Why?" "Just do it." While Rachel pulled up the digital files, Victoria tried to remember if she'd ever actually looked at Marcus's employment application. Probably not. Drivers were hired by HR, not by her. They were screened for clean driving records and criminal background checks, then handed keys and told where to show up. She'd never thought to wonder about their lives before they started driving her around. "Here," Rachel said, pulling up the file on her tablet and handing it over. Victoria scanned the basic information: name, age, contact details, driver's license certifications, all standard. But then she reached the education section, and her eyes narrowed. Bachelor's degree in International Relations from Georgetown University. Master's degree in Applied Linguistics from Middlebury Institute. Additional certification in Diplomatic Translation Services. Victoria read the section twice, certain there must be a mistake. This can't be right. What can't be right? Marcus Johnson has a master's degree in linguistics? From Middlebury? She looked up at Rachel, her expression caught between disbelief and something that might have been embarrassment. The Middlebury Institute is one of the top language programs in the country. Rachel peered at the screen. That's what it says. Also lists fluency in, wow, Mandarin, Japanese, Portuguese, Spanish, French, Arabic, Korean, German, and Russian. The silence that followed was heavy with implications neither woman wanted to articulate. 9 languages, Victoria whispered. There must be some exaggeration, Rachel suggested. People often inflate their resume skills. Georgetown doesn't accept mediocre students. Middlebury doesn't give master's degrees in linguistics to people who can barely speak the languages. Victoria's mind was racing, recalibrating everything she thought she knew. Why is someone with these credentials driving cars for a living? She scrolled further down the file, finding a section titled Previous Employment. The entries were sparse, but telling. translator for the State Department, cultural liaison for an international NGO, freelance consultant for diplomatic services. Then a gap of several years with no employment listed at all. Something happened, Victoria murmured, more to herself than to Rachel. Something made him stop working in his field and take a job as a driver. Personal tragedy, maybe? Rachel suggested. Family emergency? Burnout? Victoria didn't answer. She was staring at the list of languages, at the credentials that would have made Marcus exactly the person she needed tomorrow. The person who'd been sitting in her car that morning while she'd mocked his small life and limited vision. The person who'd apparently chosen silence over defending himself, even though he could have destroyed her arrogance with a single sentence. Ms. Sterling? Rachel's voice seemed to come from far away. What are you thinking? Victoria looked up, her expression carefully neutral despite the storm of emotions underneath. I'm thinking that I may have made a significant miscalculation. She closed the file and handed back the tablet. Her pride warred with her desperation, and for once in her life, desperation won. Call Marcus Johnson, Victoria said quietly. Tell him I need to speak with him immediately. Tell him it's urgent. Rachel's eyes widened. It's almost 9 o'clock at night. I'm aware of the time. Make the call. While Rachel dialed, Victoria returned to the window, watching her city but seeing nothing. She was trying to prepare for a conversation she'd never imagined having, asking for help from someone she'd spent months treating as beneath her notice. Ms. Sterling? Rachel's voice was uncertain. He answered. He says he can be here in 20 minutes. Tell him to come up immediately when he arrives. Victoria paused, then added something that felt like swallowing broken glass. And Rachel, tell him I'm sorry for calling so late. Rachel's shock was visible, but she relayed the message. When she hung up, she looked at Victoria with open curiosity. Are you really going to ask your driver to help with tomorrow's negotiation? I don't see that I have much choice. But you don't even know if he actually speaks those languages. Credentials on paper don't always translate to real-world ability. Victoria laughed, a sound without humor. I've just spent 6 hours trying to find someone, anyone who could help. Every professional service is unavailable. Every consultant is booked. Every academic option leads nowhere. And it turns out I've had someone with exactly the qualifications I need driving me around for 6 months while I treated him like he was invisible. So you're going to apologize? Rachel asked carefully. I'm going to do whatever it takes to save this deal, Victoria corrected. If that requires apologizing, then yes. If it requires begging, then I'll beg. If it requires admitting that I was completely wrong about someone, then I'll admit it. She turned from the window, her expression hardening with determination. I built this company from nothing. I didn't do it by being too proud to adapt when circumstances changed. Marcus Johnson is a circumstance that has changed. 20 minutes felt like 20 hours. Victoria paced her office, rehearsing different approaches in her mind. Should she be direct? Apologetic? Professional? Each option felt wrong in different ways. When her phone finally buzzed with notification that Marcus was in the building, Victoria felt her heart rate accelerate in a way it never did before business negotiations. This was different. This wasn't about dominating an opponent or maximizing leverage. This was about admitting she'd been wrong, about asking for help from someone she'd systematically demeaned. The elevator chimed. Footsteps approached. Rachel opened the door. Marcus Johnson stood in the doorway, still wearing his driver's uniform, his expression professionally neutral. He looked exactly the same as he had that morning. Unremarkable, forgettable, the kind of person Victoria had trained herself not to see. Except now she saw him completely differently. Mr. Johnson, Victoria said, and using his surname felt strange on her tongue. She'd never called him anything but Marcus, and usually in tones that dripped with condescension. Thank you for coming on such short notice. Ma'am, Marcus replied, his tone giving away nothing. Rachel said it was urgent. Victoria gestured to the seating area, the leather couches where she normally met with equals rather than employees. Please sit down. Marcus remained standing. If this is about tomorrow's schedule, I can be here whenever you need. It's not about the schedule. Victoria took a breath, forcing herself to meet his eyes. Really meet them, perhaps for the first time. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course. Your employment file says you speak 9 languages fluently, that you have a master's degree in linguistics from Middlebury, that you worked in diplomatic translation services. She paused. Is that accurate? Something flickered in Marcus's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, that she'd actually looked at his file. It's accurate. All 9 languages. Truly fluent. Not just conversational. Truly fluent, Marcus confirmed. Though some are stronger than others. My Mandarin and Japanese are near native level. Portuguese, Spanish, and Arabic are professional proficiency. The others are advanced conversational. Victoria felt her last hope crystallizing into certainty. And do you have experience with technical business translation, contract negotiations, high-stakes international deals? I do. Marcus's expression remained neutral, but there was a new quality to his voice. Curiosity, maybe, or wariness. Or, then why? Victoria asked, the question bursting out. Are you working as a driver? For the first time since entering, Marcus's professional mask cracked slightly. That's personal. I understand, and normally I'd respect your privacy. Victoria's voice was steadier now, more controlled. But I find myself in a situation where I need help. Specifically, I need the kind of help that your skills could provide. And before I ask you for that help, I need to understand why someone with your qualifications chose this job. Marcus was silent for a long moment. Finally, he moved to the window, looking out at the same view that had mocked Victoria all evening. My wife was a diplomat, he said quietly, posted overseas. I traveled with her, worked freelance translation to stay busy and help with her work. We were building a life together in international service. Then there was an accident, a car crash in a country where medical facilities weren't equipped to handle her injuries. He stopped, and Victoria saw his hands clench briefly before relaxing. She didn't make it, and I couldn't go back to that world. Everything about it reminded me of her. The diplomatic circles, the international work, even the languages we'd spoken together. So I came back here, took a job that required none of my training, and tried to build a life that didn't hurt every single day. The silence that followed was profound. Victoria had built an empire on her ability to read people, to find their weaknesses and exploit them. But standing here listening to Marcus's story, she felt something she rarely experienced. Genuine empathy. I'm sorry, she said, and meant it. I'm sorry for your loss, and I'm sorry for how I've treated you these past months. If you'd known, you would have treated me differently? Marcus turned from the window. Ms. Sterling, respectfully, that's exactly the problem. You shouldn't need to know someone's credentials or their tragedy to treat them with basic human dignity. The words landed like a slap, but Victoria couldn't argue with them. He was absolutely right. You're correct, she said simply. There's no excuse for how I've behaved. But I'm asking you now, not as my driver, but as someone who has skills I desperately need, if you would consider helping me. Marcus studied her for a long moment. The meeting tomorrow. The investors who speak different languages. Yes, I need someone who can translate with technical accuracy and cultural sensitivity. Someone who understands both the business and the human elements. Someone who can help me prove that Sterling Global isn't just another arrogant American company that doesn't understand the markets it's trying to enter. And you think I'm that someone. I know you are, Victoria said. The question is whether you're willing to help someone who's given you absolutely no reason to do so. Marcus returned to the seating area, finally sitting down across from her. What exactly are you asking for? Tomorrow's meeting is at 2. I need you there as my translator and cultural consultant. I need you to help me address the concerns that Mr. Chen, Mr. Tanaka, and Mr. Silva raised about cultural competency and market understanding. She hesitated, then continued. I need you to help me not fail. And in exchange, Victoria hadn't thought that far ahead. Name your price. Marcus laughed, a sound without much humor. Ms. Sterling, I don't want your money. I have enough money. My wife's life insurance, our savings, the settlement from the accident. I drive because I need something to do with my days, not because I need the income. Then what do you want? He looked at her steadily. I want you to understand that every person you dismiss, every employee you humiliate, every life you consider beneath your notice, has a story as complex as your own. I want you to recognize that intelligence, worth, and human value aren't measured by job titles or bank accounts. That's quite a price, Victoria said quietly. Then perhaps you should consider whether this deal is really worth paying it. Victoria stood up, walking back to her desk where contracts and projections represented 18 months of work, her vision for the company's future, her legacy. Then she looked at Marcus, sitting calmly in her office, holding all the cards despite having no official power at all. "If I agree," she said, "if I genuinely commit to changing how I see people, how I treat them, will you help me tomorrow?" "I'll help you tomorrow regardless," Marcus said, surprising her. "Because those investors deserve to have accurate translation. Because international deals shouldn't fail due to linguistic barriers. Because somewhere in the world there are companies that could benefit from Sterling Global's technology, and they shouldn't be denied that because you haven't learned humility yet." He stood up. "But whether you actually change, that's not about tomorrow's meeting. That's about every day after, every interaction. Every moment when you have the choice to see people as human beings rather than functions." Victoria felt something shifting inside her, something fundamental. "You'll really help me? Even after everything?" "Yes." "Why?" Marcus walked toward the door, then paused. "Because years ago, when I was drowning in grief, someone gave me a second chance at dignity. They hired me for a job I was overqualified for and never made me feel small for taking it. Now I'm giving you a second chance at being someone better than who you've been." He opened the door, then added, "I'll be at the International Commerce Center tomorrow at 1:30. Make sure you are too." And then he was gone, leaving Victoria alone in her office with the weight of her own reckoning. Rachel appeared in the doorway. "Did he agree?" "He agreed," Victoria confirmed, still staring at the door. "That's amazing. So tomorrow's meeting is saved?" "Maybe," Victoria said quietly. "But I think something more important than the meeting just happened." "What do you mean?" Victoria turned to look at her assistant, really seeing her for perhaps the first time, the exhaustion in her eyes, the tension in her shoulders, the fear that she tried to hide. "Rachel, how long have you worked for me?" 3 years. "And in those 3 years, have I ever asked about your life, your family, your dreams, anything beyond whether you've completed the tasks I've assigned?" Rachel hesitated. "You're a busy person, Mrs. Sterling. I understand that. That's not an answer. The answer is no, I haven't, because I've treated you the same way I've treated Marcus, as a function rather than a person." Victoria sat down heavily. "Go home, Rachel. It's late. And tomorrow, when this is all over, I'd like to have a conversation about what kind of boss I've been and what kind I should become." Rachel's shock was evident. "Miss Sterling, are you feeling all right?" "For the first time in a very long time," Victoria said. "I think I might actually be starting to." After Rachel left, Victoria remained alone with her thoughts and the city lights below. Tomorrow would determine whether her company achieved the success she'd worked toward for 18 months. But tonight had already determined something more important, whether Victoria Sterling would remain the person she'd been or become someone worthy of the second chance she'd just been given. The choice, she realized, had always been hers. She just hadn't been humble enough to see it until a driver with 9 languages had shown her what real dignity looked like. Victoria Sterling arrived at the International Commerce Center at 7 in the morning, a full 6 hours before the scheduled meeting. She'd barely slept, her mind churning through scenarios, rehearsing conversations, and wrestling with the uncomfortable realization that her entire approach to business, and to life, might have been fundamentally flawed. The building was different at this hour, quieter. The aggressive energy of midday deal-making hadn't yet infected the marble hallways. Cleaning crews moved through spaces with the invisible efficiency of people who'd learned to do their work without being noticed. Victoria watched them now with new eyes, wondering about their stories, their dreams, the complex lives she'd never bothered to consider. "Miss Sterling?" The security guard at the desk looked surprised to see her so early. "Your meeting isn't until this afternoon." "I'm aware," Victoria replied, then caught herself. The old Victoria would have said those words with sharp impatience. The new Victoria, if she could become a new Victoria, needed to try harder. "Thank you, Gerald. I'm here to prepare." The guard blinked at hearing his name. In the dozens of times Victoria had entered this building, she'd never once acknowledged him as a person. "Of course. Conference room 47 is already unlocked for you." Victoria took the elevator up, the ascending numbers feeling less like a climb toward power and more like steps toward judgment. When the doors opened on the 47th floor, she found Rachel already there, setting up materials with the dedicated focus of someone who'd also barely slept. "You're early," Rachel said, stating the obvious because she didn't know what else to say to this version of her boss who'd asked about her dreams. "So are you." "I wanted to make sure everything was perfect." Rachel gestured to the conference table where she'd arranged presentation materials, backup laptops, printed documents organized by language and investor group. "I also took the liberty of researching each investor more thoroughly, not just their business profiles, but their cultural backgrounds, their communication styles, their values." Victoria picked up one of the dossiers, a deep dive into Mr. Chen's background that went far beyond the superficial research they'd done before. "This must have taken you all night." "Most of it," Rachel admitted. "But if Mr. Johnson is going to help us translate, I figured we should give him as much context as possible." "Mr. Johnson," Victoria repeated. "You called him that, not Marcus. He has a master's degree from one of the top linguistic institutes in the country," Rachel said simply. "He deserves the respect of his proper title." Victoria felt a pang of something that might have been shame. "You're right. He does." They worked in companionable silence for the next hour, Victoria reviewing the materials while Rachel made final adjustments to the presentation. The early morning light shifted through the windows, transforming the city from shadow to gold. At precisely 1 o'clock, the conference room door opened and Marcus Johnson entered. He wasn't wearing his driver's uniform. Instead, he wore a suit that was professional without being ostentatious, the kind of clothing someone wears who understands international business culture and knows that different contexts require different presentations of self. He carried a leather portfolio that had seen years of use but was impeccably maintained. When he set it on the table, Victoria caught a glimpse of notebooks, reference materials, and what appeared to be diplomatic briefing documents from his previous life. "Ms. Sterling," he greeted with professional courtesy. "Rachel." "Mr. Johnson," Victoria replied, the title feeling right on her tongue now. "Thank you for coming early. I thought we should coordinate before the investors arrive." "Agreed." Marcus opened his portfolio, revealing pages of handwritten notes. "I spent the morning reviewing Sterling Global's technology specifications and market positioning. I also researched each of the investor groups to understand their specific concerns and communication preferences." He pulled out several pages and spread them on the table. Victoria leaned forward, seeing detailed notes written in multiple languages, Mandarin characters next to English annotations, Japanese script beside Portuguese phrases. "Mr. Chen's primary concern isn't actually about your technology," Marcus explained, pointing to his notes. "It's about trust. Chinese business culture places enormous emphasis on relationship building and demonstrated understanding of cultural context. When you presented yesterday through inadequate translation, you weren't just failing to communicate. You were signaling that you didn't value the relationship enough to invest in proper cultural bridge building." Victoria absorbed this, recognizing how completely she'd misunderstood the situation. "I thought it was about the technology specifications." "The technology specifications are secondary. Mr. Chen needs to believe that Sterling Global respects Chinese business practices and won't treat the market as just another revenue stream to exploit." Marcus moved to another set of notes. "Mr. Tanaka has a different concern. Japanese business culture values precision, long-term thinking, and demonstrated commitment. Your presentation felt rushed to him, too focused on immediate returns rather than sustainable partnership. And Mr. Silva comes from a business culture that values personal connection and adaptive thinking. Brazilians often find American business practices too rigid, too focused on contracts rather than relationships. He wants to see that you can be flexible, that you understand business isn't just about spreadsheets and projections." Victoria sat down slowly, the weight of her ignorance settling over her. "I thought I understood international business. I have a Harvard MBA. I've closed deals on 4 continents. But I never really understood any of this, did I?" "You understood how to make money," Marcus said without judgment. "That's different from understanding how to build trust across cultures." Rachel was staring at Marcus with open admiration. "How do you know all this?" "This level of cultural insight goes beyond language fluency. My wife taught me," Marcus said quietly.
"She grew up in diplomatic circles, moved between cultures her entire life. She used to say that language is just the beginning. The real skill is learning to see the world through different cultural frameworks simultaneously." He pulled out a photograph from his portfolio, a candid shot of a woman with intelligent eyes and a warm smile, standing in front of what looked like an embassy building. Elena.
She spoke 7 languages herself and could navigate any cultural context. When she died, I lost more than my partner. I lost the person who taught me that intelligence isn't about knowing more than others. It's about understanding that others know things you don't. Victoria felt her throat tighten. She sounds extraordinary. She was. Marcus returned the photo carefully to his portfolio. And she would have liked what you're trying to do today. Not the business deal itself, but the fact that you're willing to admit you were wrong and learn from it. Elena always said that true intelligence is measured by how quickly you can change your mind when presented with new information. The conference room door opened and James Bradford entered, earlier than expected. His expression was cautious, assessing. "Ms. Sterling," he greeted. Then his eyes fell on Marcus and his demeanor shifted to confusion. "I'm sorry. I thought this meeting was just the investors and your team." "Mr. Bradford, this is Marcus Johnson," Victoria introduced, and the words that followed felt both difficult and necessary. "He'll be serving as our translator and cultural consultant for today's meeting. Mr. Johnson has a master's degree in applied linguistics from the Middlebury Institute and extensive experience in diplomatic translation services." Bradford's eyebrows rose. "Middlebury? That's impressive. But I'm confused. I was told you were Ms. Sterling's driver." "I am," Marcus confirmed. "I'm also a professional translator. The 2 jobs aren't mutually exclusive." Bradford extended his hand and Marcus shook it firmly. "Well, this is unexpected. May I ask how you came to be working as a driver if you have those credentials?" "Personal circumstances," Marcus replied without elaborating. "But my credentials are current and verifiable. I can provide references from the State Department if needed." "That won't be necessary," Bradford said, though his expression suggested he was recalibrating everything he thought he knew about this meeting. "If Ms. Sterling vouches for your abilities, that's sufficient." After Bradford left to check on the arriving investors, Rachel turned to Victoria with barely contained excitement. "This might actually work." "It has to work," Victoria replied, but her tone wasn't about desperation anymore. It was about determination, not just to save the deal, but to prove that she could learn, could change, could become someone better. Marcus reviewed his notes one final time, then looked up at both women. "I need to set some ground rules for this meeting. First, I'm not here to make you look good. I'm here to facilitate accurate communication. If an investor asks a challenging question, I'll translate it exactly, even if it's uncomfortable." "Understood," Victoria said. "Second, there may be moments where I suggest you pause or adjust your approach based on cultural cues you're not picking up. You need to trust my judgment even if my reasoning isn't immediately clear." "Agreed." "Third, this isn't just about translation. It's about cultural mediation. Sometimes that means I'll add context that you didn't explicitly state, or soften language that would be offensive in another cultural framework. You need to be comfortable with me having that authority." Victoria felt the old instinct to resist, to maintain total control, but she pushed it down. "Mr. Johnson, I'm putting my company's future in your hands. That requires trust. You have it." Marcus studied her for a moment, as if assessing whether she truly meant it. Whatever he saw must have satisfied him, because he nodded. "Then let's talk about strategy. Here's what I suggest. For the next 40 minutes, Marcus walked Victoria through a completely different approach to the meeting. Instead of her standard aggressive pitch, he recommended starting with acknowledging the concerns raised yesterday and demonstrating genuine openness to feedback. Instead of presenting Sterling Global's vision as a finished product, he suggested framing it as a collaborative opportunity where investor insights would shape the final approach. "You're asking me to show weakness," Victoria observed. "I'm asking you to show wisdom," Marcus corrected. "There's a difference. Weakness is pretending you know everything. Wisdom is recognizing what you don't know and being willing to learn from those who do." Rachel checked her watch. "The investors will be here in 15 minutes. Victoria stood up, smoothing her jacket with hands that trembled slightly. Not from fear, but from the strangeness of approaching a high-stakes meeting with humility instead of armor. "Mr. Johnson," she said, "I realize this is unusual, but I'd like to say something before everyone else arrives." Marcus looked up from his notes. "Of course. Yesterday morning I said terrible things to you. Things designed to make you feel small, to remind you of your place in what I thought was the natural hierarchy of the world. I did it casually, cruelly, and without a second thought because I'd convinced myself that success gave me the right to treat people that way." She paused, making sure she had both Marcus's and Rachel's attention. "I was completely wrong. Not just wrong about you specifically, though I was certainly wrong about that. Wrong about what makes a person valuable, what measures human worth, what success actually means. And I'm sorry, not just because I need your help today, but because you deserved better than how I treated you. And so did everyone else I've dismissed or diminished over the years." The silence that followed was profound. Rachel's eyes had filled with tears. Marcus's expression was unreadable. "Apology accepted," Marcus said finally. "But words are easy, Ms. Sterling. The real question is who you'll be tomorrow and the day after, and every day when the immediate crisis has passed and old habits want to reassert themselves." "I know," Victoria replied. "And I don't expect you to believe I've changed based on one meeting or one apology. But I'm asking you to believe that I'm trying, that today is the beginning of something, not just a performance." Marcus closed his portfolio and stood up. "Then let's go prove that Sterling Global can be something more than just another arrogant American corporation that doesn't understand the world it's trying to operate in." They moved toward the door, but before opening it, Marcus paused. "One more thing, Ms. Sterling. In about 5 minutes, you're going to enter a room where you're not the most powerful person anymore, where your money and your position don't automatically command respect, where you'll have to earn trust rather than demand it. How does that feel?" Victoria considered the question honestly. "Terrifying, and strangely liberating." "Good answer," Marcus said, and opened the door. The anteroom outside the conference room was filling with investors. Mr. Chen stood with his delegation, speaking in rapid Mandarin. Mr. Tanaka reviewed documents with his team in quiet Japanese. Mr. Silva laughed at something one of his associates said in Portuguese. 3 different cultures, 3 different languages, 3 different frameworks for understanding business and trust and value. Yesterday, Victoria had seen them as obstacles to overcome, resistance to crush, skepticism to defeat. Today, with Marcus Johnson at her side, she saw them as human beings with legitimate concerns, different perspectives, and wisdom she needed to learn. It was a small shift in perception, but it changed everything. As they approached the conference room entrance, Marcus leaned close and spoke quietly. "Remember, the goal isn't to win. It's to begin building trust. Everything else follows from that." Victoria nodded, took a deep breath, and walked through the door into the most important meeting of her life. A meeting where, for the first time, she wasn't trying to prove she was better than everyone else. She was trying to prove she was capable of learning, growing, and becoming someone worthy of partnership rather than just demanding compliance. The investors filed in, taking their seats. The video screens flickered to life, connecting the room to participants across the globe. James Bradford called the meeting to order, and Marcus Johnson, the driver with 9 languages who'd been invisible for 6 months, stepped forward to translate not just words, but the possibility of transformation. "Mr. Chen, Mr. Tanaka, Mr. Silva," Victoria began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Thank you for giving me another opportunity. Yesterday, I failed to understand or address your concerns adequately. Today, I hope to do better." Marcus translated her words into Mandarin, Japanese, and Portuguese with fluid precision, his tone capturing not just meaning, but intention. Mr. Chen's expression shifted from skeptical to attentive. Mr. Tanaka leaned forward slightly, interest replacing his earlier disappointment. Mr. Silva nodded, acknowledging the humility in her opening. The meeting had begun, and Victoria Sterling, for the first time in her professional life, had surrendered control to someone else, someone who'd been there all along, waiting to be seen. The second meeting felt like entering a different universe. Victoria sat at the conference table with Marcus beside her, no longer as her driver, but as her bridge to understanding she'd never possessed. Mr. Chen spoke first in Mandarin, his tone measured but skeptical. Marcus translated not just words, but cultural context, leaning close to Victoria. "He's testing your sincerity. In Chinese business culture, yesterday's failure could mean permanent loss of face. Respond with genuine humility, not Western directness." Victoria nodded. "Please tell Mr. Chen that I understand I approach this partnership with arrogance rather than respect. I'm here to learn from his wisdom about markets I don't truly understand. Marcus translated, his Mandarin flawless, his tone capturing the proper cultural deference. Mr. Chen's expression shifted subtly, surprise, then cautious approval. For the next hour, the meeting transformed into something Victoria had never experienced, genuine collaboration. Marcus moved seamlessly between Mandarin, Japanese, and Portuguese, translating not just language, but entire frameworks of cultural understanding. When Mr. Tanaka raised concerns in Japanese about long-term commitment, Marcus explained to Victoria, Japanese business culture values enduring partnership over quick profits. He's asking if you're building a relationship or just chasing a transaction. Victoria adjusted her entire approach, speaking about decades-long vision rather than quarterly returns. She watched Mr. Tanaka's posture relax, saw the subtle nod of approval. Mr. Silva's questions in Portuguese revealed different concerns. Brazilian business culture valued personal connection and adaptive flexibility. Through Marcus's translation, Victoria finally understood that her rigid presentation style had felt cold and mechanical. Tell Mr. Silva, Victoria said with genuine warmth, that I'm learning that the best technology serves humanity, not the other way around. And that lesson is coming from people I was too blind to see before. The energy in the room had completely transformed. Investors were leaning forward, engaging, building rather than retreating. Then James Bradford raised the crushing concern. This is all encouraging, but we have a timeline problem. The consortium's investment window closes in 3 weeks. We need due diligence across 6 countries: China, Japan, Brazil, Korea, Germany, UAE. Site visits, regulatory meetings, cultural consultations. That normally takes 3 months. I don't see how we compress that timeline without cutting critical corners. The other investors murmured agreement. The deal was slipping away despite all the goodwill they'd built. Victoria turned to Marcus. What if we had someone who could coordinate all of it? Someone with the cultural and linguistic expertise to facilitate simultaneously across all those markets. Bradford looked skeptical. Ms. Sterling, that would require someone who speaks Mandarin, Japanese, Portuguese, Arabic, Korean, and German at business fluent level, who understands international regulatory frameworks and cultural negotiation. That person doesn't exist outside the UN or State Department. Actually, Victoria said, her voice steady, I believe that person is in this room. Every head turned toward Marcus. Mr. Bradford, distinguished investors, Marcus spoke with quiet authority. My name is Marcus Johnson. I have a master's degree in applied linguistics from the Middlebury Institute. Before working as Miss Sterling's driver, I spent 8 years with the State Department as a senior translator and cultural liaison. He stood, commanding the room without raising his voice. I speak 9 languages at professional proficiency: English, Mandarin, Japanese, Portuguese, Spanish, Arabic, Korean, German, and Russian. I have direct experience with regulatory bodies and business cultures in every market you mentioned. The room went silent with shock. The reason I've been working as a driver, Marcus continued, emotion threading his voice, is that my wife was a diplomat. She died 3 years ago in an accident overseas. I left the State Department because I couldn't face the world we'd built together. But she would have wanted me to use these skills, to build bridges between cultures. Mr. Chen stood and spoke directly to Marcus in rapid Mandarin, clearly a test. Marcus responded with equal fluency, discussing Chinese regulatory frameworks with sophisticated expertise. Then he switched seamlessly to Japanese, addressing Mr. Tanaka's specific concerns. Then Portuguese to Mr. Silva, demonstrating casual mastery of Brazilian business culture. The investors were exchanging looks of astonishment. Bradford turned to Victoria. You're telling us that someone with these credentials has been driving you around instead of leading your international expansion? Victoria felt every eye on her. She could deflect, make excuses, protect her ego. But today was about something more important. Because I never asked, Victoria said clearly. Because I assumed someone who drove cars couldn't possibly have value beyond that function. Because I confused job title with human worth. That's not his failure. It's mine. And if this deal succeeds, it will be because Mr. Johnson was gracious enough to help someone who treated him terribly. Mr. Chen spoke, and Marcus translated with a slight smile. Mr. Chen says he's more impressed by what just happened than by yesterday's entire presentation. A leader who admits mistakes and recognizes value in unexpected places is someone he can trust. He's ready to move forward. Mr. Tanaka nodded agreement. Mr. Silva was grinning. The other investors conferred. Energy completely shifted. Bradford stood. Mr. Johnson, if you'll serve as lead consultant for international due diligence, I believe we can meet the timeline. Would you consider that role? Marcus looked at Victoria. An entire conversation in one glance about second chances and stepping back into life. Yes, Marcus said. On one condition, that Sterling Global commits to complete cultural audit of all operations, that they establish programs valuing employees' full humanity, and that Ms. Sterling personally participates in cultural competency training. It was audacious, demanding systemic change publicly. Agreed, Victoria said without hesitation. All of it. Bradford laughed. Most unusual negotiation I've witnessed. But if you're willing to let your driver tell you how to run your company, you're finally thinking like a leader. The rest of the meeting flew by. Marcus coordinated with each investor group in their native languages, scheduling site visits and creating frameworks that satisfied everyone while respecting cultural protocols. When the meeting adjourned hours later, the consortium had committed the full $1 billion with even better terms. They'd also insisted Marcus become Chief Cultural Officer with authority over all international operations. As investors filed out, several exchanged contact information with Marcus. Mr. Chen spoke with him at length in Mandarin, their conversation filled with laughter suggesting genuine friendship. When the room finally emptied, Victoria, Marcus, and Rachel stood in silence. We did it, Rachel whispered. Marcus did it, Victoria corrected. I just didn't sabotage him. Mr. Johnson, Victoria said formally, I'd like to offer you the position they requested. Chief Cultural Officer, Executive Board seat. Compensation reflecting your actual value. Not as a driver. As someone who just saved a $1 billion deal and transformed how this company operates. Marcus set down his papers. Is this gratitude for today, or genuine commitment to change? Both, Victoria answered honestly. I've learned that success isn't being the smartest person in the room. It's being smart enough to recognize intelligence around you. Your wife Eleanor understood this, that real intelligence means understanding others know things you don't. I can't bring her back, but if I can honor her memory by becoming a leader who values people the way she did, something meaningful comes from this. Marcus turned to the window, shoulders tense with emotion. Elena would have liked you, not yesterday's you, but who you're becoming. She believed people could change if they did the work. He faced Victoria. I'll take the position. Not just for money or because the consortium insisted, but because Sterling Global could become something important. A bridge between cultures. A model for business with both ambition and humanity. They shook hands. Then Victoria pulled him into a professional hug. Thank you for seeing potential I didn't see in myself, for giving me a second chance I didn't deserve. My wife used to say everyone deserves infinite chances to become who they're meant to be, Marcus said, eyes bright. The question is whether they're brave enough to take them. Weeks later, Victoria stood before a business ethics conference, telling her story honestly. The cruelty, the blindness, the arrogance that nearly destroyed everything. Marcus Johnson taught me that every person you dismiss represents potential you're wasting, and your own failure of imagination, she told the audience of CEOs. A young executive approached after. Isn't it unrealistic to treat every employee like they have hidden talents? Victoria smiled. You can't afford not to. Somewhere in your company right now is someone you're underestimating who could solve your biggest problem. The question is whether you're humble enough to find them. And they might be driving your car or cleaning your office. That evening at dinner, Marcus mentioned creating a non-profit to help companies identify overlooked talent. Make it affordable for small companies, free for non-profits. I'll fund it, Victoria said immediately. And I'd like to serve on the board, still learning, needing accountability. Marcus raised his glass. To Elena, who taught me everyone deserves infinite chances to become who they're meant to be. To Elena, everyone echoed. Victoria had transformed Sterling Global completely. The Hidden Assets program she created discovered extraordinary talent everywhere. the cleaning supervisor who spoke 4 languages, the security guard who was former military intelligence, the cafeteria manager with international supply chain expertise. The billion-dollar deal had closed successfully, but that wasn't what changed Sterling Global's trajectory. It was the fundamental shift in how the company valued people. 6 months after that transformative meeting, Victoria drove herself home through the city, thinking about how close she'd come to letting arrogance destroy everything. How Grace had arrived in the form of a grieving widower who chose kindness over revenge. She'd spent years believing power meant dominance, success meant control, intelligence meant knowing more than everyone else. Marcus taught her that real power comes from lifting others. Genuine success creates opportunities for everyone, and true intelligence is recognizing that every person knows something you don't. Victoria Sterling had built a $3 billion empire before learning life's most important lesson. But better late than never. Better to change than remain trapped in arrogance's prison. Better to see people than stay blind to extraordinary gifts hiding in plain sight. The city lights spread below, each representing a life, a story, a human being with depth and value beyond surfaces. And for the first time in her adult life, Victoria Sterling saw them all. Really saw them. It made all the difference.